What's up, everyone? Ryan from Oakland Ghosts. Happy New Year. I am filming this on New Year's Day 2025, and sadly, I haven't had a whole lot of time to make or record any music because I've spent the holiday break completely reorganizing my setup and trying to make it so that I have a much more efficient setup, a much more efficient rig, so that my workflow is perfectly seamless. If there is one thing that is the ultimate killer of creativity, especially as you know, we get older and we have less time to devote to the things we love doing, it's a sad workflow, a workflow that we just can't get in and just start creating. And so, even though I would have liked to have been making a ton of music over this break, it was a better use of my time to just reorganize everything and set it up in the most efficient way possible. So when I get back to work and I get back to busy, I can just tap in and start creating. So I thought I would take the opportunity today to show you what my current setup looks like and what adjustments I made to make everything so much more efficient. I finally got there and I'm really happy with where we're at. So let's just take a look at what I'm working with. All right, so first off, let's just go through all of the synths. I have a lot, but as you can see, I've arranged everything. I mean, everything is within a hand's reach. It's just so much easier. I was starting to get to a point, I try to be pretty mindful of how much gear I get. I did add a few pieces here recently, and it was just kind of getting a little unwieldy. I had stuff over on my studio desk. I had stuff over in the DAWless area over here, and it was just, everything was kind of getting a little hard, especially when I'm trying to do a performance where I'm actually performing on the various synths live. And now I have everything just nice and easily set up so that it's really easy to get to. The first pieces that we have is up here. We have the B drum by BASTL, and this thing is basically utter chaos. It's a little noise box. It's technically, I guess, a drum machine, but it's completely generative. And I mean, if you're a noise artist, it's definitely, you'll probably love it. It's completely modular. You're not going to get any sound of it until you patch it up. You have to use like these super duper tiny little cables that it comes with, jumper cables, in order to even patch it together. But what you get is you get some really cool, what I like to use it for is texture. Obviously it's not going to be your main drum machine. It's only like $100, and just adding a little extra texture to your beats, it's freaking awesome. I did a video on it if you want to, where I kind of explored it, and I've used it in almost every piece since I've gotten it. It's definitely worth the investment, and at $100, who cares? Even if you don't like it, it's kind of one of those things that it's like, I'll probably still keep it around and find some use for it. But I actually really like it. Right next to that, up here, we've got the 1010 Music Nanobox Lemondrop. That's a granular synth. It has 2 granular engines as well as an additional oscillator. It's got all the traditional shapes, pulse, saw wave, triangle wave, sine wave, and noise, and you can mix all those together. Granular synthesis, super weird. Again, I've made a video on that as well. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, I'll post a link up in the corner there and you can check it out. But that's a really cool little synth as well. It also, the other thing that's really cool about the Lemondrop is it can be used as an external effects box. So it has its own reverb, delay, flanger, phaser, chorus, a bunch of really cool effects. And in addition to that, you can run the audio through those. But on top of that, you can also granulize. You can use the granular engine on any incoming audio signal. So that means you can really get kind of like the hologram microcosm. You can get some really weird, really cool external effects that you can apply to all your synths, even if you don't like the synth engine itself. So that's pretty cool. Below that, we have the Dreadbox NYX Re-Issue, which I built myself from a DIY kit. I really love this one. This is one of my newest synths, and I really love it. I've been able to get everything from like acid type bass lines to big lush ambient pads. It has this amazing reverb built in that's kind of like Valhalla Supermassive. It's just a giant reverb, and it's just amazing. So far, I've really been enjoying this synth. Below that, I've got the Taiga by Pittsburgh Modular. Another really interesting monosynth. This one could be duophonic, as can the NYX, which means basically you can play up to 2 notes at the same time if you set it up properly. I primarily use it as a monosynth. This one, what I really like about it is it's kind of a blend of both East Coast and West Coast. So you get your subtractive synth. You can get kind of Moog sounding tones, but it also blends a little bit of the West Coast philosophy, the more Buchla-esque stuff with wave shaping and wave folding and a low pass gate, and just the sounds you can get out of it are really weird. I would say this is a more advanced synth. This one is more for some people who have a little more experience with using synths, particularly modular. I would say it's more reminiscent of a Eurorack, a collection of Eurorack modules than it is a direct semi-modular synth. You know, it's just not, it's not as easy to get something up that you really like right away. Like say, it's not immediate as like the NYX or the Mother 32, for example, but it's an amazing synth when you really dive in. And on top of that, it has so many patch points that if you have any other semi-modular or modular gear, you can use any of these things across all those other pieces. So just using it as a utility alone is probably worth the price of admission. Below that, I'm running the Zoia. The Zoia, I primarily in my setup use it as an aux input so I use it as my effects box. This is where I add any kind of weird delays or reverbs. I mean, you could build anything of your dreams in here, and you don't even really have to, because the community is awesome, and probably any kind of sound effect, guitar patch, these synth patches even, somebody else has already made it, and you can download them from free for patchstorage.com and just load up your favorite ones in there, which is pretty much what I've done. And like I said, I'm mostly, in most of my songs, I'm using this as my effects, but I do occasionally also use it as synth, because it's basically a modular engine built into guitar pedal form. And there are some crazy synths that I've been able to create and that I've been able to download from the community. I love, that's probably one that I will never, ever get rid of. Going down the list over here, of course, we've got the Moog Sound Studio, the original 3 stack. They've since added the Labyrinth and the Spectravox. I've not had an opportunity to play with those yet. These are the original units. So we got the DFAM, which is a drum synth. Well, they call it a percussion synth, and that's actually probably more accurate. It has its own sequencer, but it's kind of limited. Very cool for doing very rough drum patches. The Mother 32, which is a single oscillator, traditional Moog sound. I mean, you want your basses, you want your leads, you want your pads. This guy's going to do that. Also has a sequencer built in. And then the Subharmonicon down below, which is really beautiful, very weird and sometimes challenging synth. Creates polyrhythms and uses subharmonics to create just big, thick, weird off time. Well, I shouldn't say off time because it's clock divisions of what you're doing, but it can be a very challenging synth. It's hard to tune, but it's also just amazing as an idea machine, coming up with these really unique melodies that you probably wouldn't come up any other way. Love that one. Over here is the piece de résistance. This is the Synthstrom Deluge, my most indispensable piece of equipment. I can't recommend this enough. Even if this was the only thing that you ever bought, you would be well suited. I started with this. This is kind of the thing that sent me down the DAWless rabbit hole. Currently, I'm using it mostly as a sequencer and drum machine. I also use it as an arranger to arrange all my tracks. And I will always supplement anything that I'm making with drums and synths that I also create on the Deluge. This thing is crazy. It's an all-in-one groove box. It's a sampler. It's a synth engine, multiple synth engines. It's an arranger, it's a drum machine, it's a multi-sampler. It really is kind of like a DAW in a box. I almost feel like I can't call myself DAWless because I use this, because it is effectively like my DAW. This thing is incredible, and it keeps getting better because the firmware is open source and the community just keeps creating more and more usability out of it. This thing is the one king to rule them all. You know, a lot of times I think when you see a big setup like mine and you see a Deluge in the corner, it might feel like I'm not really using the Deluge that much, but the truth is the Deluge is controlling everything. This is my clock. It's running MIDI to any of my MIDI enabled keyboards. So, you know, that would be the Lemondrop, the NYX, the Taiga, the Mother 32, and the last one down here that we haven't got to yet. But even the ones that aren't using MIDI, I'm sending clock to the DFAM or clock to the Subharmonicon. So this thing, and sometimes even CV, I'm sending to this to use this as a bass synth so that I can, you know, play it like a regular synth. So incredible. I could not live without it. This is like House is on Fire and I could only save one. That's what I'm saving. That thing is, that's the bee's knees right there. Highly recommend. And then the last piece, which I haven't done any videos about yet, this is the Vermona Mono Lancet. You've probably seen the Performer. This is basically like 1/4 of the Performer. So the Performer has 4 monosynths that can be linked in kind of various ways to create polyphony or round robin and all kinds of weird stuff. I couldn't really justify that as much as I love the sound of it, but this is, like I said, basically 1/4 of that. So if you love the Vermona sound, you can get it all from this. I will do a video about this one soon. It's not a new synth. I mean, if you've watched my channel, you know I don't really dive into new synths too much. I try to stick to tried to true. I don't like the whole gas influenced YouTube synth influencer thing where, you see the latest and greatest thing, you get jazzed about it. You want to buy it, but a couple months from there, you realize, oh, this thing has a lot of flaws or things that I don't really like or aren't useful to me. I tend to stick with something that's been out for a couple years so that I know what its strengths and weaknesses are and what the community still thinks about it. Those are kind of the things that I kind of go for, and those are the things I try to promote here. So this one, yeah, it's like a 10 or 12-year-old unit. There's lots of videos on it. I'll do one later once I've had more time to play with it. That is basically my synth setup. Why don't we jump over, because the biggest addition, the thing that made all of this, other than my new layout, super efficient, you'll notice, like I said, I have some more synths in my setup. I was running out of inputs, and I came up with a couple solutions that make my whole workflow way easier than having to chase cables all around. So let's jump over to my other table and I'll show you how that's all working, because this is something that anyone that's getting into DAWless, even if you're at a small setup right now, this is a thing that you absolutely have to add now. All right, let's go. All right, so as I've shown before, my main audio interface and mixer is the Tascam Model 12. I love this because I primarily write everything DAWlessly, and I perform my songs and stuff DAWlessly. And what this allows me to do is be both an interface for my DAW when I want to track that recording in and separate all the tracks, or act as a mixer when I'm just figuring the song out, writing the song, and recording. This does it all. It's excellent. But the thing that started to become an issue for me, and I thought I solved it by getting enough, is I started running out of inputs. I started having more synths than I did inputs on the Tascam Model 12, and I needed a solution, and I came up with a couple solutions to basically add some functionality and add extra inputs. So that's what I wanted to share here, and this was the big project that I had to kind of organize and work around during the holidays here. So let's zoom in on the back here. So what you're going to notice back here is the Patchbay. I had been told as soon as I started going on a DAWless journey, I needed to get a Patchbay. I first got the Tascam Model 12 thinking that would be plenty, that would be all that I need, and I really should have taken the advice of those kind souls who told me, get a Patchbay. Even in a small setup, a Patchbay makes sense. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with how a Patchbay works, let me just kind of explain the basics. So over on this side, these are all my main synths. These are the ones, my standard setup that I like to use. So I've got the Vermona, I've got the NYX, the Taiga, the M32, the Mother 32, the Subharmonicon, DFAM, Deluge, which is stereo, and the Zoia outputs, which are stereo. I'll get to that in a minute. And then down below, I have all my Tascam inputs. Now the Tascam has 10 inputs. So the way that I currently have the Patchbay setup is these are all normaled. And what that means is anything on this top row automatically, because of the way it's set up in the back, goes to whatever's directly below it. So, the Vermona is going to input 1, the NYX to input 2, etc., etc., etc. That's great. So basically, without patching anything on the front, that's going to be my basic setup. But now, if I want to add any additional things like my Lemondrop or the BASTL drum, they're plugged in on the top. So all I would have to do is take a patch cable, and I would say I want to do, in this track, I'm not using the Vermona, but I want to use the B drum. I would just go like that. Now I've broken the connection from the Vermona to input 1, and now the BASTL drum, the B drum, is going to be going into input 1 instead. So with just a quick patch, boom, all of a sudden I have access to that extra synth. But it gets even better, because the way that I've set this up, you'll notice that this was originally set up here. So what aux 1 is on the Model 12. You can use aux input 1 to any of your effects, pedals, all those kind of things. Like I said, I like to use the Zoia. So what I'm always doing is I'm just sending it to the Zoia input. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a return. It only has an aux send. So the return, I have to dedicate one stereo channel on the Tascam. So that's basically how that's set up. But having this also on the Patchbay, which is really cool, allows me to say I want to use the Lemondrop instead as my aux input. I can just go like that, and I can go over to the Lemondrop. And now my aux input is sending all of the tracks that I want with the aux fader to the Lemondrop instead of the Zoia. Okay, now this is all great if I'm only going to be using the 10 inputs, right? But what if I really just need that extra synth added into the mix while I'm performing? What I've done is right here I have the Deluge input, left and right. And what I can do is I can send the Lemondrop to the Deluge. And then I can use an audio input on the Deluge as an extra track, effectively adding an extra track. Also very cool. So basically now I have 11, but I found even more useful information, and I'd never seen this before, and I can't believe, one, that I didn't know it or that nobody frickin' told me. But if you have more than one I/O, one more audio interface plugged into your computer, you can combine those and use all of the inputs. Now, before I got the Tascam Model 12, I was using the Scarlett. You know, Focusrite Scarlett, just the 2-channel, everybody's got one, right? Well, now I can use the Scarlett's inputs in addition to the Model 12's inputs. So now I have 12 inputs plus the extra Deluge input. What's great about this is the microphone that I'm talking to you guys in is a condenser mic. It needs phantom power. So I couldn't really wire it up to the Patchbay because phantom power won't travel to there. It has to be directly connected to the unit. But now, because I've set up what's called an aggregate, it's really easy to do on a Mac OS computer. Basically, you just go into applications, you go into utilities, you look at the audio MIDI setup, you go in there, and you click that little plus button on the bottom and say create an aggregate. And basically you can combine those two audio interfaces into one unit using the inputs and outputs of both. And now I can have my microphone, which requires phantom power, plugged into the Scarlett, which I wasn't using anymore, and get the phantom power from it, have that extra input, and I still have one more input on there that I could use as well for guitar, bass, whatever. The point is, between the Patchbay and aggregating the two audio interfaces, I now have not only all the inputs that I need, but I have the ability to add more synths as I get them and easily swap between them in just a simple process. I plug a patch cable in, I'm ready to go. There's no more fussing around, digging around behind all my units to try to figure this stuff out. And it's just so much more efficient and so much more enjoyable to just get to the creative process without having to put much thought into it. I could just plug stuff in and start working. And I encourage all of you to do the same. Anyway, that's my studio setup. I hope this tour was inspiring, or at least showed you what some of the possibilities are that you can do by adding a Patchbay and just organizing your setup in a way that maximizes efficiency so you can get to the creativity. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing. It's a great way to support the channel, and we appreciate you guys to no end. Once again, this is Ryan from Oakland Ghosts. I'll catch you on the next one. Ryan out.